Hi and welcome back to Crosstalks. We are coming to you live from the library at the KTH Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, Sweden. If you just tuned in now, you have missed a mind-expanding talk about cutting-edge research in physics on the very edges of human comprehension. My brain is still trying to recover from that experience, so bear with me if I appear slightly confused, or also it might just be a dimensional glitch. If you missed that conversation, though, don't be worried. Assuming technology is on our side, it will be available on our website within minutes. Now, speaking of technology, we will focus now on a technological field that started as utopian, moved into our factories, and is increasingly integrated into our everyday lives: robotics and artificial intelligence. I am happy to introduce to you 5 great natural intelligences here to discuss the ultimate destiny of man and robot. 3 of them will be in the room, 2 will be joining us later on Skype. Torbjörn Tännsjö is the Christian Larsson Professor of Practical Philosophy at Stockholm University. Danica Kragic is Professor of Computer Science here at KTH Royal Institute of Technology, Stockholm. And Torbjörn Larsson is Professor of Safety Management and Occupational Injury Prevention, also at KTH Royal Institute of Technology. A warm welcome to you all.
Thank you.
We'll start with you, Danica Kragic. Can you explain for us what robots are capable of today?
So as you said in the introduction, it started with industrial robotics, and robots in the industry still exist. To summarize, a set of pre-programmed robot arms can put together a Toyota car in 23 hours, and no man can do that today. Now we also see robots in other applications or in other areas, such as, for example, medical applications, where robots collaborate with surgeons and help to perform surgeries on humans that are more exact than the surgeon would do himself. But we also see robots as part of our homes, for example, let's say vacuum cleaners that can clean floors completely autonomously, swipe floors. And we also see robots as, in research labs, robots built as looking as humans, for example, interacting with humans, and also robots that look maybe like animals, performing tasks in environments that are maybe difficult for humans to reach.
I realize as you're explaining this that I'm actually not entirely sure about the distinction between a robot and just a very clever machine. So is there a definition that we should be aware of?
Robot is a very clever machine. Now, a very clever is very difficult to measure. What does it mean, very clever? And I think that intelligence in general is very difficult to measure when it comes to humans too. I think that when we talk about clever machines, we talk about machines that can, either in collaboration with a human or completely autonomously, execute efficiently tasks that are of interest to a human to some extent. Tasks that are boring to us, like, for example, swiping floors.
But the blender is not a robot, so because it doesn't do it itself?
No, the blender is a tool to me. However, because it's pre-programmed, this is why I said that robots, as we saw them historically in industrial settings, are pre-programmed, but they are still called robots because these are machines that do something or perform a certain kind of tasks. Robots that we talk about as researchers, and I think that robots that we are also used to see in Hollywood movies, are more intelligent machines that can do things completely autonomously and think of how to do things that they have not been programmed or pre-programmed for beforehand.
But robots can't really do that today, right?
Well,
so
they can.
They're not completely autonomous, or?
Yes, they are. So we do have robots. Well, I can start with something that is maybe not a robot, but we have unmanned cars, for example, that can drive on their own. And this is a machine that can react based on the sensory information to the information that is currently available to it. So if there is a pedestrian passing a street or something like that, the car will stop. And you know, it depends on what it can measure, how autonomous it is.
I don't think the car can decide where to go.
No, maybe not, but it can decide to stop. And I think that is one way of deciding, I mean, making a decision based on sensory data is to some extent absolutely not deciding.
I'm just pointing out that there's probably a man or a woman that has decided where to decide to,
where to go.
send the car.
But then that's true about industrial robots as well, of
Yes.
course. You need to tell them
What
to do and what to look out for when there's trouble in the system somehow. But that is interesting because it would seem that I'm just trying to like establish the field that we're talking about here. But yes, of course, we already know about these sort of, driverless cars. That seems to be a reality. Yet when we look at films, as I have been doing very interestingly on YouTube for the last week, looking at films of robots in labs, those seem to have great problems doing simple tasks like figuring out where the walls are and stopping and so on. Why can the car do it so well and the robots that you're building here, for instance, find it so challenging?
Well, they can do it. From the scientific point of view, detecting walls and detecting different hinders and objects, it's to some extent a solved problem. But there is still a challenge of, for example, defining or seeing a difference whether there is a piece of a cloth on the floor or if there is a child of 2 years, just sitting on the floor. So I think that, and this is something that is also for humans difficult to do. So seeing somebody hiding, for example, underneath a table or something like that. Humans use lots of other type of information, which is experience, for example, using information about what we used to see in a certain setup, and then this information is reused in our brain. For robots, this is still a challenge. So, storing the information and then using the information that is contextual based on the place or the environment where they are.
That's great. I feel we have established perhaps the state of the field in a very general way. Let's also introduce now our Skype participants. Let's see, Ruzena Bajcsy is Professor of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science at the University of California, Berkeley. Professor Bajcsy, are you with us? Yes, hello,
Yes.
I can hear you. Welcome to Crosstalks.
Thank you.
And,
Here now, is it?
and there we are.
Yeah.
Welcome to Crosstalk, madam. And also Alastair Reynolds, the best-selling science fiction author with a long first career as a scientist at the European Space Agency, should be joining us from Wales. Alastair, are you with us?
I am indeed. Hello.
Yes, there we are. Hello, welcome to Crosstalks.
Thank you very much.
Welcome to you both. I think I would like to, Professor Bajcsy, to ask you this question. Many of your projects involve human-machine interfaces in different ways. For instance, this one is my favorite, looking at equipping cars with a kind of artificial intelligence that could take over and drive itself if the human driver starts behaving erratically. So sort of mixing the idea of a robot car and an ordinary car. But if what Danica just explained about robot perception being very difficult is correct, how can we teach machines to judge human behavior and react appropriately?
Very good question. That's what we call the million-dollar question. Because the only thing, hear me?
We're losing a little bit, I'm afraid. I heard that it's the million-dollar question.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes. The problem I find is that actually machines have to solve.
Sorry, ma'am, could you possibly move closer to the microphone? Maybe that might help.
Yes, I am coming.
Better, thank you.
Yeah, the issue to me is that machines have to cooperate with people, and the idea of having a society completely isolated or independent of the machine, including the autonomous drivers, is not very appealing nor acceptable. So all my focus is on how to make machine cooperate in the best and an optimal way with the humans. Now, in order to do that, we really need to understand the behavior of humans from the perspective of the machine, so that the machine can react properly to the human intent and interaction. Now, the big issue here is that I can observe your physical activities, how you move, how your eyes are moving, how maybe even your facial expression, but I cannot crawl into your head.
No.
And so assessing the mental state is really a challenge. And so far, unless we assume that we will be carrying some electrodes on our heads, I don't think that any of us are very willing to do that. It will have to be a very indirect assessment of the human intention.
Yes.
And that's a real challenge for the machine responding properly to the human behavior.
Thank you. I'm going to, I think, repeat some of this because it might have been very difficult to catch in the room. So the real challenge is to make the machine understand human intention, particularly since, I mean, the machine can observe things like eye direction and physical movement, but of course it can't, and maybe even facial expressions will be possible to read in a machine way. But since we are not willing to wear electrodes on our head while we drive, it will be very difficult for the machine to judge when we are actually sort of losing control or being distracted. So that is a big challenge, and already I think we've entered an area which will be at the core of this conversation, which is about how the machines and the human society and I guess abstract ideas like freedom interact with each other. Torbjörn.
Just a quick comment on this. I mean, aren't we in the same predicament when it comes to the kind of information we could rely on? When I want to know how you think, I have to go on your behavior, so to speak. Even electrodes on your head wouldn't help me. So the difference must be something else. It's not the method you derive the information, but rather, I suppose that I can sympathize with you. I have also consciousness. I have a mind, so to speak, and that might be helpful when I try to understand you, because you also exercise those mental capacities, even when you drive your car.
But robots won't for a very long time.
For a very long time, but of course, I mean, we should perhaps also discuss that.
Actually,
No.
I've started to do the specs for my home care robot that I'd like in 15 years' time, and I would like it to be as sensitive to me as my golden retriever is. And I know that that's because the golden retriever has a hearing which is much better than mine, and can sense when I'm distraught or if I'm angry. And a robot should be able to do that. I'd like the robot to be able to pick me up if I've fallen. I'd like it to be censored to the stuff, my vital data, and probably ask me how I feel when it can feel that my blood pressure is a bit too high. But all of those things are, it won't take 15 years. It'll probably be done. But
still, I mean, perhaps this is a distinction without any difference, but many people would say so. If you are capable of doing all those things, then you have mental capacities, then you have consciousness. I mean, that's a behaviorist position, of course. But I have the feeling here that there is still a difference. So even if you could act as though you had this inner life, it's different from having it. And I think that it's possible to give also this inner life to machines sometime, but I guess that is
so what you're saying is that when the robot is asking how you feel, Torbjörn feels that it's important that the machine means it, that the machine cares about your answer, and you just want it to ask you that so that it can help you if you're in trouble.
Well, I think my dog cares about me.
Yes.
I can't see the difference here. I'm sure I know people that have no inner life.
I agree about the dog, but I would like to see that kind of robot. I think at the end of the day, we will meet that kind of robot, but we're not close to that.
Tore, very simply put, your field is workplace safety. How are robots already affecting working environments for humans, and where do you see that going?
Oh, that's been happening for probably 100 years. I'm particularly interested in how we're going to live until we die, because I think we live integrated in our own homes until the final moment. And in that case, work life for people that will look after people in their home will be quite robotized, I think, both with intelligent machines that'll help those that work, but also maybe as substitute, as intelligent companions.
There are some demographic reasons in the global north why we would need more robots to care for the elderly.
Yeah, in the
certainly.
industrialized world.
But wouldn't you ideally have a person, or is there to you? Do you seem to really want the robot? Is it just because robots are cool, or is it because you don't want another person snooping around your affairs?
No, but there's a, if we're being quite realistic now, there's a great shortage of staff in aged care. There's a shortage already, and there's going to be a big bulge in demographics. People in my age will be a lot larger group in society in 25 years. And I think we need to be looked after. And I don't think there's manpower enough.
But yes, sorry.
If I can, yeah. So I just wanted to go back a little bit to what we have discussed regarding the intention and understanding the intention of a human. Like for us, it's training. If I meet you for the first time, right, I will somehow project what I would do in a situation that you do, and then try to, think about what you will be doing next, as if I would do it if I was in the same situation. This is how we understand each other, right? When we marry somebody and spend, 10, 15, 20 years with somebody or the whole life, that person does not necessarily need to speak anymore what he feels or what he intends to do. You use, body kind of features and how they, just small kind of features to understand their intention. And this is where systems that observe us under longer periods of time come into play. The more they look at us, the more that they can measure how we look and what we do and what we say, the more they can understand or predict our intentions. So everything is training. So as you have said, maybe not necessarily we would like to have robots, but we would like somebody that spends long time with us, so that I don't need every day to explain a new person that comes and helps me to put my bed in order. This is how I'm used to do it.
Yeah.
And this is what you can do with the machine, right? You can instruct the machine several times of how to do certain things, or the machine can observe you and then learn from your instructions. And this is what we want. We want a continuity. We want somebody that is around for a longer periods of time and understands us. And
when you talk about this, you make it sound like it really will happen in our lifetimes. When in my case, I have to say we're still in science fiction territory, and I would like to bring Alastair in for this reason. First, Alastair, do you have any immediate comment?
Well, I would agree that the bulge in terms of our population demands is something that appears to be forcing robotics on us at a pace that perhaps we didn't anticipate a few years ago. I mean, certainly in Japan, there's a tremendous initiative in terms of equipping the population to survive in the coming decades, when there's simply going to be a huge number of old people. And it's not just robotics. There are also a great deal of work going on in things like exoskeletons, so that people who work in nursing homes can lift and move people around. So the Japanese are certainly taking this very seriously, and we societal trends over the years, the Japanese tend to be ahead of the curve.
I would also like to ask about your novels, Alastair. They are very scientific indeed, your science fiction novels, and they concern themselves quite a lot with space travel. What do you think realistically the role of robots will be in space exploration, now that we're finally doing space exploration again, which is very exciting, of course?
It is tremendously exciting. Well, the fundamental problem with space is that it's very big, and it takes a long time to send a radio signal anywhere. So we have this dichotomy that it is, at the moment, cheaper to send robots to places like Mars and the outer planets. It's much cheaper than sending human beings who require complex life support systems. But at the same time, those robots are many, many light seconds away from being able to be directly controlled. So even with the robot that was landed on Mars last summer, the robot must, of necessity, have a measure of autonomy so that it can take decisions in real time. Because if you have to wait hours and hours for from the OK from mission control before you move forward an inch, then you almost never get anything done. So I think again we have this a push towards increasing robot autonomy, but at the same time that means that those robots will become increasingly complex and increasingly perhaps even human, in my opinion, on a timescale of centuries.
That's actually very good because, of course, those developments will immediately be put to work in all of these other fields of robotics. I think,
Yes.
Torbjörn, Tännsjö, ethics, of course, being your core field, there is a pretty high awareness in society in general of ethical issues relating to biomedical research. And this is reflected also in the field of philosophy, where ethics in those questions are very much azure. But how much of an ethics conversation is there among philosophers about robotics?
Well, to some extent, the questions are the same, of course. I mean, these post-human ideas that we might replace human beings by robots or by genetically engineered continuations of ourselves, so to speak. And that has been discussed a lot. But I think those more mundane questions that we are now raising are of course discussed, but not as much as they should be, I think. If we have those robots taking care of us, not only when we're old, perhaps, they are so good at responding. We could even have sexual intercourse with them, then we could have them as our friends, and they are never problematic in a way. They are always kind to us. What if we come to prefer that kind of social relations to the, so to speak, real ones? Is that a problem or not? Well, some philosophers of a Kantian bent, of course, would say that unless they really are rational beings like us, they are just good at pretending, then there is a big issue here. We are degrading ourselves by using them as mere means to our satisfaction rather than interacting with one another. But on the other hand, there are philosophers like me who are hedonist utilitarians who could, in principle at least, welcome that kind of perspective. And I think this is a genuine problem here that has not been discussed, at least not to the extent that it should be discussed, even though it crops up. I'm in the ethical board of the healthcare system, the Socialstyrelsen directing healthcare in Sweden. And there it comes up when old people are offered, as people think, those kind of gadgets instead of genuine human contact. And there is concern, of course. But in principle, perhaps it's not a big deal, really.
Do you find it a little bit offensive, this idea that robots are lesser beings? I mean, they are now, but that they ultimately will be. You looked a little bit concerned there.
If I'm offended, I wouldn't say so. I think that doing the research in that field, you actually see the possibilities. And what I think is important is that we actually need to accept the fact that there are some humans that are not capable of interacting with other humans or with other beings, biological beings in general. We talk about people that maybe have a dementia. We talk about people that have different, mental disorders and so on. And I think that in those cases, of course, it might be a good thing to actually have a machine that they interact with because they cannot hurt a machine, although that might also become an ethical question. What is that we are allowed to do towards machines? So there are aspects of those. Now, how we live our life and what's real, what's not real. I don't think that that's necessarily, follows with robotics solely. We do have people living in cyberspace in different, playing games and things like that. So I think what is important is to see how is the generation that comes after mine or 2 generations after mine, what is real to them? How does their brain react to actually have something that we consider is real and something that we consider is not real? So, maybe it's not going to be any more perceived the same way as we perceive it, because they are used to some other type of contact and to some other type of reality.
Well, certainly we've stopped. I mean, still 10 years ago, we used to talk about very much about the internet as the opposite of the real world. And more with us carrying the internet with us wherever we go, that's just not a relevant distinction anymore. Now maybe we think of the physical world and the digital world as the dichotomy or something like that. But when you raise this question about when you mentioned not being able to hurt humans, of course this raises immediately some other kinds of ideas, like prisons where the guards would be robots, or the astounding sums that the military-industrial complex is pouring into robots. And it would seem that, I mean, the kind of research that you do, for instance, at the other end, these robots might be used to hurt people. And how does the field handle that?
Okay, so I think that throughout the history, mankind has been building other things. We can talk about chemical weapons. We can talk about nuclear weapons. You know, technology can always that was originally meant for good purposes. It can always be misused. But on the other hand, we need to think about history and you know, really see that there are, even if we do have access to all these things, they are not misused in some form of, you know, general level where half of the earth is destroyed or anything like that. So I think that what is important to have in mind is that there are rules and there are laws, and that I don't see that the technique, even if we, you know, our vision of future is very, very much rooted in Hollywood movies.
Yes.
And I would say that most of the robots that have been portrayed in movies are villains. How many movies do we remember where there was a good robot?
Wall-E.
Wall-E, yeah, but that's, you know, one of many. So I think that how we see it is because we have seen it in movies.
Okay, let's talk about that. Most of us are still getting our concepts of what robotics can do from science fiction, whether it's Blade Runner or the Isaac Asimov novels or something like that. That shapes both our goals, our dreams, and our fears. So how much is science fiction affecting the directions and goals of scientific research?
When it comes to home care, very little.
Real problems.
Not much at all, no?
Yeah, well, I would say that, you know, as a researcher, you need to be visionary. And you need to think future, and you need to have crazy ideas, right? So I think that from that perspective, we are guided maybe by a will of building something that we don't have right now. So really making, you know, a footprint and, this is something that I have done, and I was the first in the world.
Sorry, Alastair, when you were a space scientist, were you guided by science fiction in your goals?
I have had an interest in science fiction and space science for as long as I've been alive. So it's very hard for me to say which one shaped the other. But the work I was doing as a space scientist was very, very focused on a particular area of astronomy. So it never felt like it had anything to do with my sort of interest as a science fiction reader or writer, which have always been much more, I suppose, about this, you know, the post-human condition or cosmology or contact with extraterrestrials. We also weigh out questions.
But in the Western science fiction tradition, and writing about robots goes back much farther than the word, perhaps 200 years or something like that. And since the very beginning, there has been this idea that humans and robots would mix in different ways, that one would replace the other, or we would have these hybrid forms. And it always, you have this idea of the independent robot that can decide for yourself. And then what that requires, of course, is artificial intelligence. I wonder, Professor Bajcsy, I mean, you are in artificial intelligence, so is your field aiming consciously to build the conscious robot? Is that the goal for you?
I need to correct you. I'm more roboticist.
More roboticist, yes.
Although it is true that my initial education was in the artificial intelligence laboratory, but I really, honestly, I want to remind the viewers that actually the word robot came from Karel Čapek in 1938. when he observed the Hitler military exercises and how they were, acting sort of on command and so, and then he kind of, in some ironic fashion, put the robots that could replace people in the wars. So the idea really goes way, very back. But I'd like to think that we can view robots as more complementary to our daily lives, especially now with the aging society coming on in certainly in the developed world, but even in China. There are definitely, as we age, our physical capabilities are diminishing. You can reach as far, you cannot walk as easily, and so forth and
Yes.
so on. And there seems to be that the robotic technology can be a tremendous difference.
Thank you.
On the mental level, it's a much more difficult problem, and I shy away from that part.
Thank you, Mary. Professor Bajcsy shies away from this, but I'm not quite going to let it go. Alastair, okay, now you must be the resident visionary. How do you view the convergence of humans and machines?
Well, science fiction, there's sort of two strands to it. There's the sort of familiar type of science fiction, which we might see in films, where robots are often portrayed as a sort of threatening development, which we create them, and almost immediately they want to wipe us out or take over the planet. But I think within sort of literary science fiction, there's a somewhat more nuanced, thoughtful handling of the topic, and particularly as robots are a real world development now. There's lots of exciting things going on in the laboratory, and that's feeding back into science fiction. And I think we are beginning to see a more realistic, integrated view of our future as a society in which people and robots collaborate and coexist. And for me, that's far more interesting than the idea of robots sort of rising up and sort of trying to wipe humanity off the face of the planet.
But what about humans with machine parts, for instance, converging from that direction, from the humans and out? It's very, very difficult to build a robot that behaves like a human, but it's, well, as Professor Bajcsy also said, some humans behave as robots already, so giving them machine parts and enhancing them in different ways, it would seem to be an easier way to find this cyborg fusion.
I think the whole question of convergence is generally interesting, because on one level we have there are people walking around with implants in their eyes, in their brains. People now have possibility of prosthetic limbs that are wired directly into the nervous system. Google Glasses are coming online very soon, and before you know it, you'll want them embedded in your eye itself. So we are slowly becoming, or some of us anyway, are slowly becoming cyborg organisms. And I think with robots, we will demand of robots that they seem, certainly the robots that we are obliged to interact with in our daily lives, whether it's in nursing homes or in our own homes or out in the world, we will not want them to feel too robotic. We will want them to have at least the illusion of free will and some unpredictability in their behavior. And I think once we go down that path, we're on the very, very slow road to some kind of convergence, centuries in the future perhaps. But I think the distinction between human and robot may become less importance to us as we move into the future.
Danica looks very happy when you say that. I'm a little bit worried. Tore, how do you feel about this idea of biologically enhancing humans or giving them machine parts, for instance, to make us more suitable for our jobs? Now, this sounds like science fiction, but it is already happening, and certainly we will see more of this. I mean, within our professional lifetimes.
Yeah, I see no ethical problems with that at all.
Not at all?
No. I think there's probably one more important ethical issue in this, and this has to do with access to this technology. What is it going to cost? Will I be able to afford my intelligent companion when I'm 85 and all my funds are dried up? And how is this access to technology dispersed in the population? Those that really need it, are they going to get it? And how are they going to pay?
I'm worried about the legal ramifications, these kinds of things. I mean, again, workplace safety. We have enough difficulty with making the legal frameworks to protect the people who work with ordinary kinds of machines. If you give the machines free will, should they have workers' rights, for starters? And also, the ideas of responsibility, I think, become very blurred when you give non-human entities agency.
Just a quick philosophical note on the free will.
The free will, yeah.
I don't think we should identify it with unpredictability. I mean, that's not the way we conceive people who have. I mean, it's a difficult question whether we have it or not, and in what sense we have it. But at least when we attribute free will to someone, it's not because this guy is unpredictable. It's rather that this person do not act out of character and has some kind of core that we could trust on. So it might be easier, I think, to create free will, or it might be even easier, perhaps, to make it unpredictable. But still, the notions should be kept in place, I think, in this way.
But would you agree? Would you, as a philosopher, agree that there should be, or is perhaps, some kind of distinction between ideas of agency in machines built by humans and agency in humans themselves? And again, I think we are using, but I mean, robots are being used in wars as we speak. Drones, of course, being one problematic technology, and we know that we are looking very carefully at how to be able to make the drones completely independent. Now they're being flown, of course, by human pilots, but also things like pack animals in the field, robots that shoot at people. These are being tested in wars that are happening in the world right now.
It would be terrific, of course, if all wars could be fought in the desert by robots, killing off one another. So
or not have wars at all,
so
maybe.
That would be even better.
But we
have
need
it
to
like
get rid of all
tournament.
those machines.
That would be terrific, but what happens in real life, it becomes an access question. On one side you have people who don't have robots, and on the other, so the human cost of war is becoming less.
There's another aspect, I think, to this ethical question. Of course, this kind of equipment that we need, we should provide for everyone who needs it. But it also this interface that we could, together with the robots, get new senses and cognitive enhancement in all sorts of ways. I think I'm utterly skeptical about the importance of cognitive enhancement in the sense that I don't think that you become happier because you become more clever in those ways. You get an you get I got it from experience. You get a competitive advantage in a competitive society if you have those capacities. But if you judge from happiness studies and so, it seems as though you could be equally happy without some of your senses, and perhaps even more happy if you're not that clever in the way you measure it in IQ scores and so on. So I think that it's a problem here with the goal of this development. Perhaps it's misdirected in a way.
But I'm not even sure what the goal of the development is, because the robotics field seems to be building robots because they're awesome. And also
really.
to solve real problems.
That needs to be made clear. I mean, we want to build useful machines. That I think is really, really important to say. Now, there are different branches, right? If you build a machine that in some form resembles human completely, hardware-wise and software-wise, if we can rebuild a new human, did we understand then a human better? So that we do trial and error things. So you build things incrementally, and then you build something and understand a human, rather than going and opening somebody's head and measuring what's happening in the brain where you do this and that. So from that visionary point of view, and we are very, very far away from building flesh and bones and everything that can put together a completely artificial human. So we want to build useful machines. We want them to do things that are boring for us, that are dangerous for us. So that needs to be made clear. And that's not all that easy, because the environment around us has been built for this kind of a body. And even for disabled people, it's not so very easy, to go just wherever and to walk freely on the street and so on. So the fact that humans do that robots do look like humans, and that we try to build robots that have legs and so on, is just to allow them to be, or the environment around us to be accessible to them. And I think that this is really important to have in mind. One of the current challenges is to actually build artificial hands that have the same capability as the human hand, and that shows to be very, very difficult.
And there, of course, the use would be prosthetics.
Well, prosthetics, because if we can build an artificial hand, then we can put it actually on a human that has lost his hand, and then we have actually done something good.
And it can help me to play the clarinet better?
Not better, but it can help you to play the clarinet if you have lost your hand, which you cannot do anymore, and you're not maybe as happy anymore.
It's time for audience questions. Already we could talk about this for hours, I feel. Do you have a question, sir? You look like you have a question. Yes, please stand up and tell us your name and from which institution you are.
Hello, my name is Amir. Actually, my question is regarding as you know that nowadays in the news you heard that some group of the academians and the Nobel Peace winners, they actually they launched an international champion to urge the world leaders to stop production of the killers robots or being developed nowadays for the future wars. And as you know that the first principle for the robots is help and protect the mankind. But my question is, if we develop the ultra-intelligent machine, how we can control it. Maybe in the future, they lead us and they take control of the world. How the border should be.
Thank you, Amir. That's very interesting. So, yes, Nobel Prize winners trying to limit the development of fighting machines. I think perhaps wisely. Should we be very worried about this?
I think that we are already living in the society where the infrastructure and communication and everything is stored and led by machines in different ways. You know, before the turn on the 2000, we have been talking about, what is going to happen, and all machines and computers are basically going to be, broken. There's going to be some big error and so on. That's actually not the case, and big things are not happening, even if lots of the infrastructure around us is actually controlled by machines. Now I'm talking about computers, I'm not talking about embodied machines. So I wouldn't be scared, because if we are able to do this with a large-scale infrastructure already, where there is much more information going on and being sent around, why wouldn't we be able to then control one machine?
Alastair, do you agree?
Well, I think the degree to which military robots will pose a threat to us is really in the hands of the designers and the militarists. At the moment, a lot of those the drones that we hear about are, they are not autonomous in the true robotic sense, but certainly there is a push towards robotic military technology with full autonomy. And I find it very disturbing, but I see that, unfortunately, we cannot have progress in development of robotics in one field without the sort of slightly unpleasant consequences in another. It's like any technology. It's essentially, it's ethically neutral, and it's up to people what they do with it. And I feel that this is the case with robots as well.
It was a joke, of course, when I spoke about those robots waging wars against one another. It's so unrealistic. But it is realistic, I think, to legislate how war should be allowed to be. I mean, it would be even better, of course, to do away with wars altogether. But I think there should be regulation against these kinds of warfare that is already illegal, I think, under existing laws.
Amir referenced a law of robots, which I think comes from Asimov, of course, where in this fictional universe, all robots are equipped with certain rules, like you can't ever harm a human. Finally, then, would this be a good plan? Should we just have a global agreement that we're gonna build the most advanced, wonderful robots, but they're not allowed to hurt humans?
I mean, this is of course a natural thing, and I don't think that this is questionable or will ever be questionable. I mean, machines we can control and humans we can't. So I don't know why we are so afraid and discussing these things when we are actually, I think that the mankind is threat to itself much more than the machine are threats to the mankind.
Tore?
Well, how do you stop war? Can we have a moratorium on nasty robots?
Your answer is no, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, Torbjörn, how do you feel about this? Is it realistic?
I mean, then we're back to the free will problem again. I think if you really construct robots with free will and superior intelligence, then I think my colleague Nick Boström has really used this as one of the arguments why we should take all sorts of precautions, because I mean we may put an end to ourselves. We might go extinct just because we have created those robots. I think it's a genuine threat, but perhaps not a very imminent one. There are other problems that should perhaps concern us more today.
We're running out of time, but very briefly, Professor Bajcsy, yes or no? Should we make robots incapable of harming humans? No. Alastair, yes or no?
No, and it's impossible anyway. We could never embody the ethical set of ethical instructions in a robot that would enable it to make that decision.
Very well. Thank you so much, Torbjörn Tännsjö, Danica Kragic, Tore J. Larsson, Alastair Reynolds, and Ruzena Bajcsy. We will be back on the hour with a conversation on the global health gap. We'll be right back. Thank you.